Hey, and welcome back. In this video, I'm kind of following up on the Eagle Raider video that I'm posting. And this build I used in an arena match that I uploaded already, which I'll link in the description so you can kind of see it in action. I'm also going to present a alternate bridge officer layout just, to kind of get some ideas. And I don't think this is the best build ever. I think there's definitely ways to improve it. But it's kind of just there to give some ideas. And the Eagle console that just came out, I'll highlight that here. Basically, whenever you use this console on any ship with a full pilot seat, any ship that has pilot roles, it reduces the shared torpedo recharge. So normally there's a gap between firing torpedoes, and that gap is severely reduced. It's actually not even half a second, it's less than that. So in a ship like this, I'm actually using 5 forward torpedoes. That's definitely not optimal, but it definitely is fun. And that's kind of what I'm about, at least when it comes to PvP, is trying new builds and trying to enjoy it. So this console opens up some build possibilities. Any ship with full pilot can do this kind of thing now. And that is slotting 5 torpedoes and not having to worry about only 3 of them firing because the first one is off a recharge before the next ones or whatever. And when I was using this build, all of these torpedoes were firing pretty well. So, and I'll kind of talk about how this build is set up. And basically what I wanted to do was create like a torpedo kinetic build that was more of a dogfighter and less of like a vapor type thing. Most torpedo builds, like in the past, from Star Trek, are used like you fly in and you deal a really, really huge torpedo hit and then you fly out really fast. That's kind of that play style, is maximum 1 hit. And I wanted to create a build that could stay in sustained combat reasonably well, but using torpedoes instead of beams or whatever like we normally do. And one of the key things that a ship like this, if I were using beams, is that you use 2 abilities, usually beam overload 3, plus some cannon ability, rapid fire or scatter volley, doesn't matter. Because both of those, they activate the healing that you get from those colony consoles, the protomatter infusers. And for those of you who don't know, there is a kinetic version of the protomatter infuser. So the kinetic version activates whenever you use a torpedo ability or a mine ability, and torpedo and mine abilities don't share a cooldown, so you can actually double up on these consoles healing just like you can on a beam build. So normally you would hit like beam overload, which would then start healing, and then you would hit scatter volley, which would start healing. In this case, it's the exact same thing. I use torpedo high yield, and see, there they are, they're healing me. In this case, building temporary hull, and then I hit mine dispersal pattern, and now there's 4 of them, so I get all this healing back to back like that. Now, the biggest difference is whenever you use like beam overload or cannon scatter volley, you don't actually have to fire a beam or a cannon for it to take effect. So like on those builds, I have beam overload and all of my weapon slots are beams, and the cannon ability is just there for the healing, it's not doing anything. In this case, mine dispersal pattern will stay active for 30 seconds unless you fire a mine, which means that you can't get as much healing. So what you want to do is you want to be able to use mine dispersal pattern every 15 seconds, which is the minimum cooldown. That way you can heal faster. So for that reason, my rear weapon is the Tetrion mine launcher, which has a 15-second recharge, which is short enough that I'm able to fire off that mine. I actually have it on my spam bar here. So I have the mine dispersal pattern, and then later in the spam bar is the Tetrion mines, which is also auto-firing for that matter. And basically what I'm doing is I'm just dumping mines behind me whenever I can for the sole purpose of getting this ability off cooldown. That way I can continue to heal rapidly. And the same thing with torpedo high yield. When you hit torpedo high yield, you have this 30-second cooldown. You have to fire a torpedo in order to use it again quickly enough to keep that healing going. Same way as a regular dogfighter. So I'm never really dealing much damage with the Tetrion mines. I'm not sure if I ever even hit a target with those. Photon mines also have a 15-second cooldown, so you could use those. Or maybe you could slot 2 rear mines. You could do like blackout mines or web mines or whatever you like. With 2 mines, there's a little bit more room for error too. So that's an idea. I'm using the kinetic cutting beam, and the reason for that is kind of the theme of this build is kinetic damage, and that was the best I had. But also this knocks off immunities, like if someone is running the shield mastery, which negates an incoming critical hit. I would rather them negate a critical hit from the kinetic cutting beam, which doesn't deal that much damage, than have them negate a critical hit from, say, my neutronic torpedo, which is really critical to my damage. So they'd be, basically 18,000 kinetic damage with the neutronic, or 2,000 with the kinetic cutting beam. I'd rather lose the 2,000 than the 18,000. So, as for the rest of it, I'm running the colony deflector. You could also use the Jem'Hadar deflector, the 3-piece competitive set as always, but you could also use like the Tilly's mycelial 2-piece and Tilly's shield there. That's good, or whatever you like. The experimental weapon, since this build kind of hinges on the Eagle console anyway, I'm using the Eagle's experimental weapon, which has been parsing really well for me. It's based on aux power, and on these builds I'm running a very high amount of aux power as well as engine power, so I'm seeing good numbers from this weapon. The shield damage that it does doesn't seem to be all that much, but still, it's dealing good damage, so nothing wrong with that. You could also use the standard stuff, soliton impeller, graviton implosion charges, whatever have you. So going through the tactical consoles, I already talked about these a little bit. The protomatter infusers work the same way as the energy versions. The biggest drawback, and you'll notice this kind of right away if you're kind of eagle-eyed, and that's the I'm using the quantum variants of these, and that is because 3 of my torpedoes, the neutronic, quantum phase, and dark matter, are boosted by these quantum consoles. But I do have the enhanced biomolecular here, which is not seeing any improvement, and the ultimate torpedo, which is classified as a plasma torpedo for some reason. So those torpedoes are not getting boosted. If money were no object, for example, I probably would get the Delphic torpedo and slot that here. And then maybe instead of the ultimate torpedo, I could use like the wide angle quantum from that Sovereign class, or there's a couple different options. You could go all quantum and make it work. Or you could get the photon variant of these consoles and go all photons. Or you could get the transphasic if you want to be disappointed by how terrible transphasic torpedoes are. But you get the idea. There's no like all torpedo damage versions of these consoles. So that's just something to keep in mind. Then the last tactical console, I'm only using 4 of those because that's all I could afford at the time, is the Lorca's Fire Controls. That forms a 2-piece with the torpedo here for extra crit severity, and the console itself also gives us a little bit of shield pen, not a lot, and crit chance. My science consoles, I have the Eagle console, of course, which makes this whole build possible, and also gives me the ability to battle cloak on a ship that doesn't normally have a battle cloak, which is kind of cool, but I'm not quite sure how effective that is in practice, and you have to be careful. If you do use this, your shields immediately drop until it's disengaged. So if someone can see you because they have high perception and you don't have a lot of stealth, you're still going to take a lot of damage there. Then I have the subspace jumper console that teleports you behind an enemy. I talk about this more in the Eagle video, so I'm not going to demonstrate how that works. Watch that video if you want to see it in action. But this is really effective at, kind of teleporting behind somebody and then shooting them immediately in the back. Then I have DPRM. This is strictly defensive console for me. The additional hull regen and bonus damage resistance is really important to staying alive. Alachi Rift Jump. You could also use fluidic phase decoupler or whatever. This one is to get out of holds like parasitic ice or the Parliament bubble console, other web spinner, that kind of thing. Akar's Vengeance I have slotted here as well. This adds to a little bit of the spike damage and the Electrical damage, it does ignore shields as well as disable subsystems. So I'm really just trying to disable someone's shields long enough to land a few torpedo hits. And someone who's more into the math side than me can go into more detail about this, maybe check out STO builds or whatever. But kinetic damage from torpedoes and the like is reduced by 75% when hitting a shielded target. So anytime you're hitting shields with these torpedoes, you're getting substantially reduced damage numbers from them. So it's to your best benefit to either knock someone's shields completely offline or improve your shield penetration skill in some way, whatever you have to do to get through those shields. And then I have hull image refractors. That is for the temporary hull overflow, exactly like a regular Dogfighter. The last console, I have the ultimate swarm processor here. And this is strictly for more accuracy. I felt like I was seeing a lot of misses when I tested this build at first. And the swarm processor does improve that accuracy and crit rating a little bit. You also could use like hostile acquisition or weapon sensor enhancer. There's lots of options here. And this does form a two-piece with this ultimate torpedo, but that is not intentional. That's actually kind of an accident. I didn't really think about that. The plasma saturation bombardment thing that it does, this little plasma damage shot, it's cool, but it performs very poorly, so it's not really worth... Like, don't go out and spend 400 Lobi on this torpedo in this console because you saw it on my build, because that is the tiniest part of this build. It really doesn't do anything for it. Moving on to my specializations, I was using Command and Miracle Worker. I had Pilot on still from when I switched from the Eagle, so but you could swap in whatever you want here. The reason I like Command is you have this very tiny 1% chance to expose a target for torpedo exploits, but if you do actually get one of these, 100 armor pen on a torpedo can deal a lot of damage. And I do like these other abilities from Command. Achilles Heel, which lowers their damage resistance and outgoing damage, as well as boost morale, which clears my own debuffs when I need to, and this incoming healing increase. There's just a lot of benefits to running Command. But you also could run like Strategist, makes you immune to torpedoes. If you turn Threatening Stance off, it increases your crit severity if you're going for more severity. Or you could do like Constable now, since Placates aren't as big. You could use Constable to have additional ability to slow down your enemy. Or I think there's one that strips debuffs somewhere. There you go. 5% chance for space weapons to remove the 5 longest duration buffs from your antagonist. I mean, if that hits, that's awesome. So something to keep in mind. You got lots of options now. Moving on to traits. I have unconventional systems slotted here because I do have 2 control abilities. However, I think that you could drop this trait and slot something else if you gave up those control abilities for an alternate layout, which I'll kind of get into when we get to the bridge officer spot. So just keep that in mind. This trait you could swap for something else if you give up your control abilities. I have a good day to die because I'm a tactical captain, and this allows me to use this 50% bonus damage all the time. Fresh from R&R, that lets me use my team abilities faster. Give your all dodges some incoming damage. Intelligence Agent Attaché. That's really useful for using my attack pattern alpha, tactical fleet, and even that go down fighting more often. As well as that, this is really useful in this build, the vulnerability assessment sweep, a little extra armor penetration for you and your allies. Next I have pseudo submission. That placate is still useful against intel and science ships, that kind of thing. Then I have Reconstructive Radiation, which is a heal and damage over time cleanse. Secret Command Codes, which is another heal whenever you're affected by a control. Then I have Self-Modulating Fire, which lets me pierce shields by 50% every 45 seconds. So that's a really good one, especially with torpedoes like this. And Terran Targeting Systems for additional crit severity. The slow effect of this is not really all that noticeable, so I feel like it's worth it. Oh, and of course the Boimler effect. I feel like the Boimler effect's a bit of a staple on a lot of builds now, so it's a really good trait. For my starship traits, I am running carrier wave shield hacking. That couples with this tractor beam that I have slotted here. It disables my engine or enemy shields for a few seconds. And it also triggers off of intel abilities that have an enemy targeted, like evade target lock, which I am also using. So if I evade target lock someone, they also will lose their shields for a few seconds. Then I have advanced precision guided munitions. This is from the Cabot. That deals additional kinetic damage when a target's shield facing is down. If I could increase my shield penetration even higher, I would drop this trait and I would slot something else. Or like one trait that I don't have that I kind of wish I did for a build like this is One Big Happy Fleet, which is from the legendary Miranda. That trait, over time in combat, helps you build up to 50% shield pen. So if you build up 50% shield pen, and if you got shield pen from self-modulating fire and whatever, then this trait won't be that effective for you because their shield facing won't be down under 15% trait. I'm not sure if this works. If their shields are completely disabled, I'm not sure if this trait works. I'll have to test that, I guess. Then I'm focused on high yield torpedoes here, but more on that in a moment. With high yield torpedoes, I'm using Assault Formation Theta, and that's for the extra high yield. Lets me fire 2 high yield torpedoes back to back. If I had the Alachi Cheshire trait, I could use that for yet another high yield torpedo. And then I have Temporal Surge. That's mostly for the speed and the little brief 2 seconds of untargetability. That helps me kind of get out of trouble or give chase. And the 100% crit chance is really nice as well. So lots of benefits to running this trait. And since I'm on a ship with intel, I also can cool it down quickly. The last 2 traits are kind of defensive. I have Rhythmic Rumble. Obviously, the reduction in weapon power cost does not benefit the ship because I don't have any weapons that consume power besides the cutting beam. But the damage resistance does still help, especially at the kind of speeds that we're at in PvP. I mean, 300 damage resistance there. That's a lot. That's really useful. And then Invincible, that's for just getting out of trouble and trying to avoid dying. My reputation traits, I've got both these Dyson ones that I always run. Bonus, damage, resistance, really awesome. Extra crit severity. I'm using Counter Stroke, which increases crit severity even further when controlled. But if you aren't being controlled a lot, then this trait does nothing, so ditch it for something else. There is a trait that increases shield pen, this one from Nukara. Only 6.5%, but if you're stacking a lot of shield pen from other sources, it all adds up. And then I'm using Torpedo Pre-Fire Sequence, extra bonus torpedo damage. Viral Engines Overload is my last one. That is for disabling my target's engines, especially with a lot of fast movers. If you can disable their engines with a lucky hit and then nail them with a torpedo, then you can kill them really quickly. So this is a great trait to have. So let's look at the bridge officer stations. One really great thing about this ship is these 2 Universal Lieutenant Commanders give a lot of potential for kind of adjusting the build. And this is the build that I ran in the arena video that I uploaded. So basically my tactical seat, I've got Omega and high yield, and then the mine dispersal pattern, which is basically there just for healing, and pilot team for the placate immunity and all that. Science team I always have for clearing drains, gravity wells, Tychons, spore infused, confuses, subnucleonic beams, all that stuff. Engineering, I have engineering team 1. That's pretty much a must-have for making sure my engines and aux power don't go offline. And auxiliary to structural integrity field, that's a heal, damage resistance, and placate. So really, really useful. And then my last engineering ability, I kind of squeezed into this intel seat. Emergency power to engines is another must-have in my mind. You can't really go slow in PvP or you're pretty much in trouble, even on big ships. But then elsewhere in the intel seat, I have Intel Team 1, which I'm just constantly rotating for the additional perception, as well as some extra defense and stealth, which is good for me staying alive. And Evade Target Lock, which I usually use defensively to get out of trouble. Like, this will get you out of parasitic ice and parliament bubbles as well. But on this ship, since I'm using carrier wave shield hacking, that also can be used offensively to disable someone's shields. And it has a 10-kilometer range, unlike Tractor Beam, which only has a 5-kilometer range. So you could use this against someone a little bit further away to get your torpedoes off. So kind of double use on this build. And then the science seat, I have Photonic Officer, which I always feel like I have to have. Tractor Beam, that's just another one for the carrier wave shield hacking trait. And Photonic Shockwave. And the reason I'm using Photonic Shockwave is it is an unconventional systems proc that you can activate with no target around you. You can just hit it whenever. So the nice thing about that is if I'm away from the fight or I'm like struggling to target someone because of stealth or whatever, I can hit this every, has a minimum cooldown of 30 seconds. I can hit this every 30 seconds whether anybody's around me or not. So that's constantly recharging, in this case, Alachi, DPRM, that kind of stuff. Another really nice thing about Photonic Shockwave also is if parasitic ice hits you and your ship is encased in parasitic ice and you hit Photonic Shockwave, it actually pushes the ice away from your ship and then it breaks and you can keep flying. So it's got a defensive use as well. And I guess if you got really close to somebody, it does have a debuff, -30 kinetic damage resistance to the target that you hit and disables them. So you could use it offensively too if you get really close and then Photonic Shockwave somebody and shoot them with the torpedoes, that kind of thing. So lots of potential around in that seat. Now, one alternate layout, and this is kind of going to be more similar to like a traditional dogfighter, is to swap these two around. So like if I put my my pirate here and the potato here, I can put the same intel team and evade target lock, and I move my Photonic Officer here. And that allows me to slot something like this, kind of a more traditional dogfighter layout. I've still got my engineering team and Aux Sif, but now I'm cycling 2 powers, emergency to engines and emergency to Aux, for additional perception and stealth. Or I could swap that for emergency power to shields for better survivability or whatever. And then I also have reverse shield polarity, which is a really nice survivability measure, when taking energy damage. Or here's another option. You could put in emit unstable warp bubble if you're fighting somebody that's using the jellyfish from the summer event. You can fly by and hit this and pop them out of the jellyfish bubble. So this kind of alternate layout could also be, really effective. Maybe something like that. There you go. So that's basically that's a regular dogfighter. The only difference is a regular dogfighter would just have beam, overload, and scatter volley here, and then that is a dogfighter layout with beams. Basically just swapping 2 abilities around, going high yield and dispersal pattern. One other option that I wanted to mention is you could also do a spread build on this by slotting spread. Maybe you would give up Omega and slot your mine. I don't have one unlocked. Maybe you could do clean getaway. And then swap in, maybe make this one a tactical. Now I'm just theory crafting at this point. There you go. So now you got double. Oop, you could even do like that. And then slot entwine tactical matrices. There you go. So that's 3 torpedo spreads back to back. Something like that maybe. You lose that placate immunity from pilot team, but I don't know. There's lots of things you could do. Even the eagle trait itself. Let me see. I forgot exactly what that one is called. Stealth torpedo bomber. There you go. So this one, when you have it slotted, it won't work because I'm in a social zone right now, but whenever you do a pilot maneuver, every 2 pilot maneuvers is a free torpedo spread, basically. So if you're constantly using pilot maneuvers, and then you also had entwine tactical matrices slotted, and you're using that kind of layout, you could basically be chain firing torpedo spreads like crazy. And torpedo spreads, you don't have to worry about accuracy. Torpedo spreads always hit. Well, as long as the physical torpedo can make it to the target, the torpedo spreads always hit. So there's an idea. Another thing that you could do is you could slot you could put beam overload in here and replace one of the torpedoes with the Piezo Polaron, and then you get that technical overload hit. And there is a duty officer as well that increases shield bleed through, like this, when using beam overload. And that shield bleed through benefits all weapons. So like if you do beam overload and you get this additional shield bleed through and you get a technical overload hit and your torpedoes are firing, you know, there's a lot of potential for high damage. I mean, really, with so much universal seeding and so many abilities and stuff in the game now, it's like hard to do these build videos because there's 50 different ways to run the same ship, you know, and it's hard to objectively say which one is necessarily the best way. But oh, I forgot to do my my duty officers, but basically I have these projectile cooldown duty officers, 2 of them. If I had 3, I would run 3, but I'm not going to buy one. So instead I have this increased kinetic damage guy, which I grabbed a long time ago. It's been bound forever, but I would swap him out for another recharge officer as long as you're running 5 torpedoes. Maybe if you're only running 2 or 3 torpedoes, then you know you'd put a beam overload guy in here or whatever. And then the next 3, same 3, I literally always run con officer for evasive maneuvers, Oxysif placate, and the warp core engineer to clear debuffs. I feel like those are pretty much must-haves. So anyway, that's the build. It was really fun to fly around. I thought it was very entertaining and pretty decently survivable. I mean, it pretty much behaves like you're flying around in a normal, you know, any other normal escort that you would, you know, use with beam overload, except you're firing torpedoes. So kind of cool to have you know, that build option, and it did perform pretty well for me, I think. Let me look at the parse really fast. I think that was this match. Yes. So let me go to the combat analysis reports. No, that was not that match. This one? Yeah, this is the one because I have restorative protomatter matrix on my heals list. That is that's the colony console. So let's look at damage 2. Let's say I'm shooting at Nalot, Chancellor, Lant, Rare, Baroness. Yeah, these damage values are substantially less than the Eagle build that I posted. But this is a totally different match. So it might also, you know, depend on who you're shooting at. Something different about PvP compared to PvE is like in PvP, if I deal a bunch of damage to someone and they have no resists, it makes me look really good. But like in this case, like if I'm shooting at Nuh here and I deal all this damage to him, I might have dealt less base damage to him because look how much resistance he has. Look at the base damage. 4.8 million damage. But he only took 1.5 million damage. He's basically resisting, you know, almost 70%, 75% of my damage, which is pretty common in PvP, obviously. But if you've wandered into this channel from PvE, that probably surprised you. If I look at my abilities, let's see. Not sure how these shots happen that deal 0 damage. I think those are what immunity. You know, I landed an attack, but it dealt 0 damage. That's got to be an immunity. And like biomolecular, I hit a warbird for 111k. That doesn't matter, but I did hit a couple of players. That didn't perform very well. What about 11,000 hit from a kinetic cutting beam? That's more than I expected. Oh, and I did actually hit stuff with the mines. No players though. Oh no, I got a hit on Chancellor 7 with a mine once, which he was immune to for 0 damage. So worthless. Again, it was just for the healing. So let's see, neutronic. Yeah, those are decent. I mean, the max 1 hits aren't as important. This isn't a vapor build. This is more about kind of more constant damage. But I don't think. I mean, like I said at the beginning, this was a really fun build to use, but I don't think it necessarily was all that incredible. That's pretty awesome. The sympathetic detonation, 77k 1 hit there. That's pretty awesome. That's the trait from the Cabot, this one. The additional kinetic damage when a target shield facing is low. So that seems to be working pretty well in this build. So there's 100 different ways to optimize it, and I'm sure someone out there will come up with an even better build than this. But it was pretty fun flying around basically a Torp Dogfighter. So I guess I'll have to do the Hydra next. That's probably the next video I'll do. And either way, thanks for watching and have a good one.